testing. That always works, right? To get everyone's attention. So welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Because we have live stream also, I want to make sure that we try to stick to the schedule so we can do that. So thank you for coming to everyone. I'm so glad to welcome you both in person and virtually. If I haven't met you, I'm Cristina Alcalde. First, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I'm Cristina Alcalde. I am Vice President for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm just so glad to be here. This is the third annual Across the Divide conference, and the way I see it, the first one in 2019 was in person. The second had to be fully online because of the pandemic. This one, we're hybrid, so we're moving in the right direction. So hopefully by next year, it'll be possible to do all of this in person. So to start, I first really want to thank folks who have helped with this. As any of you who've been involved in event planning know, putting any event, and especially a conference, especially during the pandemic, requires so much work, so much collaboration. So I'm going to just call out a few people. I know I can't call out everyone. We don't have time, but I do want to make sure that I thank a few people here. So first, I don't know if he's here still, but President Crawford and the PEC, who have been so supportive of this and other DEI programming. Also in the President's office, Diana Winnick, who has been incredible since the first day I got here and with this conference and putting so many things together. And of course, the Planning Committee. The Planning Committee has made all of this possible. And I want to call out just a few people. I see Dan back there. Thank you, Dan. Been doing so much to make this possible. As well as Betsy Krieger, Michelle Rosenkrantz, who I think are outside or here, but they were doing registration now. So thank you so much for doing that. Webpage with Shelley Minton, where is she? She has really saved us in so many ways as we've been getting this together. So thank you so much. Colleen Floyd, Simran Cole-Corbett, Laura Carroll, Sati Williams, who are also GAs in the Office for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion. Tetsuya Ishiyu, Christian Ponce, gracias. Carolyn Craig, Jared Harder, Barb McCombs, and Loma Sangodibo, who is no longer at Miami, but he was definitely part of the planning committee and very much contributed to these efforts. I also want to thank Ron Scott, who's not here, but who started this conference, and for making this possible, and Anthony James, who led efforts last year for the second one. And anyone here or on live stream who volunteered to moderate one of the panels, thank you so much. That we couldn't do this without you, and it means a lot to us. Finally, Tyler and his team, who's doing live stream. Where's Tyler? Thank you so much for back there for making this possible, and Kathy Squans, who helped us set all of that up. So the goal of today is to come together and learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I should add also, of course, justice and belonging. Both what we're already doing here at Miami, and we're doing some amazing things, but really also what's possible when we come together and have discussions about where we are and where we want to be. There's some amazing efforts. I want to mention a few because we're going to have some panels that you'll have a chance to participate in, such as the Bridges programs for students, DEI programming through the arts, and I believe this is one of the first times I'll be speaking about that at the conference, campus climate justice efforts, and faculty anti-racist research. All of these, we have panels on all of these, interactive panels today, and we really want to make sure that we focus on dialogue in those panels so we can really see what else we can do and what we're doing. Of course, because we're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we also fully recognize that there's still a lot of work to be done, internationally, nationally, locally, and here at Miami as well. We know it's not enough to simply state we're doing well at diversity, because our core commitments are founded on inclusive excellence. We need to be much more specific, given that diversity, as we know, can be such a broad term. We need to be able to identify in what areas and with which groups we're making strides, and where we still need to focus more efforts. We need to name what specifically we mean and who we are referring to when we talk about diversity, so we can see who we're missing and what we can do to make sure they're included. And the panels today do precisely that. They contribute to these conversations, they contribute to these efforts, allowing us to learn about the experiences, for example, of international students here on our campuses, of what it means to be Asian American, what it means to be Latinx, what it means to be Black, Miamia, or to identify as LGBTQ+, or to have a disability here at Miami. This year, we have almost 20 different sessions. It's a new record, and I really wish, and I'm sure many of you do, that we could be at all of them. But we will be recording them, so for any that you're not able to participate in, you'll be able to watch the recordings. A highlight of the day, of course, will be the keynote. Our two distinguished guests, Dr. Carolyn Hodges, they're sitting up front, and Dr. Olga Welch, will speak to us about the possibilities of re-envisioning diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher ed. And more specifically, they're going to draw on their research and their personal experiences to talk about what it's like to be a woman of color, and more specifically, a Black woman in spaces that are predominantly white in higher ed. And why this is important for faculty, for staff, for students, for higher ed. So I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming in person. We'll also conclude the day by honoring our DEI award winners and providing certificates for this year's certificate cohort. DEI work, especially during this year, has been especially labor intensive. So I think it's especially important to be able to recognize everyone that's been involved in these efforts. And of course, they didn't all win awards or certificates, so I want to say thank you out there to everyone who's contributing to these efforts. So a few technical notes as we start. For those of us in person, we do ask that you keep your masks on at all times. And if you sign up for a boxed lunch, please pick them up between 11:35 and noon, just right outside here. So now I invite you to join the wonderful lineup for the day, starting with our first panel of the conference, the Dean's DEI panel. I see my colleague sitting right over here. On the role of academic leaders in moving forward DEI within their units and more broadly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a minute so that they can come join me up here, and then we'll get started with the DEI panel. And I invite you to go to as many panels as possible throughout the day, have as many wonderful discussions as you can, so we can really all benefit from this. Thank you for coming. Does everyone have a mic? Does everyone have a mic? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I was gonna stand back there, but I don't really have a mic, so I'm just gonna stand up here, but really, they're the focus. So what I'd like to do is first thank you all for coming. As we know, deans are have such an important role for faculty, for staff, for students, for all of us, and in Miami. So I think it's critical that as we start the day, we have a conversation with our leaders, with our academic leaders, about their efforts, about their thoughts, about how they're collaborating, about their views moving forward. So what we thought we would do is we would start out by 3 general questions that I'll pose. And of course, we want to make sure that everyone here also has a chance to pose questions. So we'll have time for that as well. So to get us started, I thought maybe very briefly, if you could each introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started with the questions.
Good morning. My name is Andy Durajai, and I serve as Vice President Dean for the College of Liberal Arts and Applied Sciences.
Hi, I'm Chris Macroff, the Dean of the College of Arts and Science.
Good morning, I'm Jason Lane. I'm the Dean of Education, Health, and Society.
Good morning. My name is Mary Rojero, and I'm actually the chair of the Department of Architecture and Interior Design, but today I'm playing the role of Dean Liz Mullenix from the CCA.
Good morning, Jeannie Derrick, Dean of the Farmer School of Business.
Jerome Conley, Dean of the University Library.
Deena Sukumaran, Dean of the College of Engineering and Computing.
Mike Crowder, Dean of the Graduate School.
Thank you. And I should say I worked with everyone here, and I feel so fortunate to count you as colleagues. I think you're all doing amazing things, so I'm so excited to be able for everyone to hear more about this and for us to have a conversation about this. So to start off, I thought maybe we could start with one of the deans who's been serving here the longest and one of the newer deans. If you could tell us a little bit about what you view as the role of the dean in addressing and advancing DEI at Miami and specifically in your units. So Chris and Andy, if you want to start us off.
Well, if you can't tell, Chris has been serving just a little bit longer than me. I think the role of the dean in the DEI efforts here at Miami University is we have to be the ones who set the tone. We have to be the ones core to all the decisions we make and all the efforts we do. You know, specifically within the people I have the ability and opportunity to connect with on a day-to-day basis, as we think about decision making and how we're moving our academic division forward for the future and serving students, we have to make sure that every decision we make, we think about how it impacts our DEI efforts. And one of the things I try to empower our folks to think about is, if it's not moving our DEI efforts in the correct way and not positively impacting them, then it's probably not the right decision. And so when you think of it contextually, oftentimes we make decisions in our roles, we're thinking about finances, we're thinking about the economics, we're thinking about, you know, political and other issues that we have to balance. And oftentimes when we make a decision that's not sound financially, we won't make that decision. And we've got to make sure our thinking is the same way around DEI. So if we're making a decision that's not sound in that space, then it's probably not the right decision for our unit. And so, really high level, the other thing I think we also have to emphasize is that all of us are DEI professionals. One of the things that I think is a challenge in higher education is we have someone like Christina or different individuals within our units, and they're tasked with DEI efforts, and so individuals kind of take a hands-off approach and say that's their job. But really, we all are DEI professionals. We all have to be committed to the work, and it's incumbent upon all of us to do that. And so the dean has to be the one, I think, that sets the tone for that going forward.
Yeah, I would echo what Andy just said, and from my perspective, I think the dean needs to lead by example. So it's always good to tell other people what to do, but I think you don't have any credibility unless you do it yourself. And from more of a strategic point of view, I think the dean is in a unique position where they see the entire college and they have a better idea of how the college intersects with other divisions. And so the dean, like Andy says, understands the resources. They know what resources you have, what resources you don't have, where you see deficiencies. I think the dean's responsibility is to try to identify resources, to move into that area where at all possible, to try to bolster and build things, to hire the best people to help lead that effort, because deans are not all experts in DE&I, so you need to bring on the right group of people. And you have to identify all the great individual things that your departments are doing and ensure that you're sharing that information, because one of the things that I've learned is that even though we're one college, departments often act as isolated islands. And so they develop best techniques and practices that they're not sharing with other departments. And so it's also incumbent on us to work with other deans to share the best practices that we've learned in our colleges. And then I guess I'll end with fundraising. Deans now need to raise money more than ever, and so it's also our job to go out there and tell the story to our colleagues, to the foundations, of the great work that we're doing, come up with the best plans and ideas so that we can get the resources to make our work and our jobs easier and better so that we can make progress. Because as we all know, everything takes resources, and if you don't have the resources, you really can't make as much progress as we would like to make.
Thank you so much. Anyone else want to jump in? We'll move on to the second question, and thank you. So Chris, also you both mentioned collaboration. So the second question is, as you think about Miami, can you share with us some of the lessons you've learned so far about how you would approach DI within your unit, but also in collaborating across units, which is so important. So for this one, perhaps we can go with Bina, Jenny, and Jerome. We're sitting right here.
With the university libraries, we're Switzerland, so we don't like to take sides. We like to work on the horizontal, not on the vertical. So we always are looking for collaboration and partnerships with my colleagues on this dais with me. But one of the things that we have done in the last year is we have provided up to $1,500 mini grants within the university libraries for anyone to apply for. That could be a classified staff member, an unclassified staff member, or a librarian, on anything that they envision will promote and advance diversity and DEI within our community. And that has taken us, as Chris mentioned, resources, but we felt that we needed to put our money where our mouth was, that those ideas could come up and percolate from all levels of our community, and that we need to inspire and empower people to think and dream of the environment and the culture in which they wish to foster within the Miami University libraries in general, as well as Miami University in a broader context. And we award 4 each year, and we just had our second round, and they are represented by, the panel's represented by classified, unclassified, and librarians in choosing those awards.
only been here a year, so I don't have Dean Conley's long perspective. But when I look at some of our programming, and I'm in the College of Engineering and Computing, we already face a challenge in the DEI space nationally and at Miami, just because we have severe underrepresentation of people of color, of women in our spaces. So I think it's critical for, at least for my college, to work with some of the other colleges and the libraries, because we have to join forces to change that. And to change the narrative around who is welcome in our spaces, who can actually do engineering and computing. And so we have a great program that we do with Dean Makarov's college called the LSAM, the Louis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, where we bring in students of color and and with some socioeconomic diversity, and we give them programming so that they will succeed in these spaces that are predominantly white. And in my college, predominantly male, right? So how do we change that? And we also have to look at organizations, because you need safe spaces for students. Again, students from whether it be LGBTQ plus groups or students of color, women, so that they have safe spaces to meet. So we have organizations that cross across our colleges, like out in STEM. We are just about to have a chapter of that at Miami. We already have a strong chapter of National Society of Black Engineers. Again, we do it collaboratively with Chris's college. We're just about to set up a Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. So I think there are things that we can do in collaboration with the various units. And we also have to change some of our practices in the classroom. So one of the things that I have noticed is that I have faculty who are great teachers, but we never talk about how they teach inclusively, right? How do they, especially in the technical disciplines, because they think there's no room for that in the technical disciplines. So I think giving them the training so that they can do that effectively, again, that requires collaboration across units at Miami.
Well, good morning. Good to see everyone again. So I'm going to give you a slight story to reach the point of what we're doing in the school. So I've been here a year. I moved from Los Angeles, which, if I'm not mistaken, more than half of all households in California speak Spanish. I'm looking at Christian, I think that's true. Where I was the dean, so I was really used to working with Hispanic and Latinx populations. I also come from New Zealand. I'm from the majority, the white majority in New Zealand. But if you know anything about New Zealand, you'll know that we're bicultural, bilingual, and we've done a good job, I think, with respect to how we embrace the culture of our Indigenous populations. I'm immensely proud of being a Kiwi and about reaching out and working with Indigenous populations. So when I came here to Oxford, my first impressions, it's not very diverse. It's not a very diverse community. In fact, when we walked around in our first summer, we thought we were walking on a movie set compared with Los Angeles. It looked like we were in a movie set. And so, of course, I moved in the summer of 2020, which was a difficult time in America's history with the racial unrest, the murder of George Floyd, and many other racial tensions and atrocities that were happening in front of us. And that was the beginning of my time here. President Crawford was leading an initiative to develop a DE&I strategy for the university. That was important work. And in fact, if I go back to my role or my identity as being a Kiwi, a New Zealander, one of the first meetings I asked for when I arrived was with Daryl Baldwin of the Maiamia tribe, because that's exactly what I would do in New Zealand. I would reach out to our Indigenous tribe, our iwi, and get to know and start to build bridges with. Then I look more specifically inside the Farmers School, and we're a very white, male, straight majority school. That's who we are. It's not great, but that's who we are. I look at our numbers. We hover around 10% students of colour. We're not quite at 40% women in terms of students. Very white, male, straight school. And it's hard to move the needle, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. When I looked at we had some success this semester. We had 15% increase in applications from female students, and we yielded 20% more women than we had last year. So we saw that as a victory. With students of colour, we were up 20% in applications. I'm looking at Michelle as I speak. We didn't yield one more than we did last year, and I'll talk about Michelle's great work too. So I'm very mindful it's hard for us to move the needle. We have some great programs. Michelle, who's in the audience, Michelle Thomas, runs some tremendous programs that focus on access and success of our underrepresented minorities. For example, we have a passport program. We bring about 25 students in. We wrap a concierge service around them, and the outcomes are actually better, slightly better than they are for our majority students in terms of retention. We have a U Business program where we try and showcase business as a viable career for people as opposed to being a doctor, lawyer, maybe an engineer, which are often professions that are preferred. So we have a great U Business program, again, that Michelle leads. We have had some interesting experiences, not great experiences last year, around Zoom bombing and some racial slurs and things that we were just horrified that would happen here on our campus. Some, thankfully, were not our students, they were outsiders. But it forced some very interesting dialogue. So with the MBA, which is our Multicultural Business Association, they provided great leadership to try and bring conversations with people who are different to our students to try and get understanding. And I've been really impressed actually by our students and their willingness to engage in conversations that might be simply uncomfortable because they want to learn, they want the world to be a different place. We also, in our curriculum, we have what we call a CQ program. It's cultural intelligence for all of our students. Every single one of our students is required to be tested in terms of how culturally intelligent they are. We spend time in the first semester that they're with us, providing programming, and then we test them again. And now we're looking at what we should be doing in years 2 through 4 so that we can test our students again. And the position we take there is that it takes the majority to affect change, but also these are all future leaders. All of our students go out to be future leaders. So the question is, how do they show up differently? How do they embrace difference in the workplace? How do they lead effectively and make sure that they're aware of some of their own biases and so forth? So that's a program we're proud of. I'm glad Chris mentioned fundraising. We raise money around this. It's an area that our donors are really interested in. The Ryan Scholars Program is $1 million gift that allows 3 students from underrepresented minorities to get a full ride. And that's important. We just raised $500,000 for the passport program, and I believe a $60,000 check is coming our way for U Business. That was great too. In terms of what are we doing, so one of the first things I did was I actually got Michelle to report directly to me. She reported up through an associate dean, and that's great, but I wanted to really know what was going on and work closely with Michelle as we're trying to move the needle on DE&I. We also, we've got great programs, so there's a lot of great things that are going on at the school, but we don't have an overarching strategy. So that's our priority right now, is to bring all the pieces together, develop a strategy, set some goals, and really understand what does great look like for us? Where do we want to be in 5 years? And that is proving to be more difficult than we thought. So we're working with Christina and with her partnership, looking at what a DE&I strategy by department would look like. So it's like, where do you start? You know, do you start at the top, go down? Do you start at the bottom, come up? And I think it's a bit of both. So we're working in a position where we're asking the departments to start at least looking across their units and paying attention to all the big bucket of things that belong in DE&I, from students to faculty to how we collect data and report data in our research, even things like the artwork that we have on the buildings. So we're working with Liz on that one too. So there's a whole lot of things that fall into the bucket, and we're trying to really push along and develop a strategy for us. And at the same time, we're also taking interest in social impact, which I know is different, but it crosses over, where we firmly believe that business is a force for good. So we're trying to train our future leaders about their responsibility to affect change in their community. What I love about the deans that we have, as I close, is that we have a fantastic group of deans, and we do work well together. And when we're trying to solve things, Bina undersold herself, really, Bina, for the leadership you provide in DE&I and the national community of engineers. I mean, Bina does tremendous work, and so there have been times, for example, I've asked Bina for advice on DE&I strategy for her school, for example. So we have that kind of relationship, and I think, as I close, I think the underlying principle is that we're all trying to effect positive change. It doesn't happen overnight, but we're making strides, and sometimes it feels 2 steps forward, 1 back. Sometimes it's 1 forward and 2 back, but I think we're making gains, and I think that's the more important thing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And you've touched, all of you have really touched so much on changes. So I want to pose the next question to Jason, Mary, and Mike, maybe to continue along those lines, thinking of, and to everyone here, but maybe starting with them, what are some of the main changes that have occurred in the DI space in your unit, and how are you planning to make sure that it continues in that direction in the coming years?
So one of the things that attracted me to Miami in the first place was the deep and unabiding commitment that the College of Education, Health, and Society has to DEI. It is something that was written into the job description very strongly. They wanted a dean who was going to also believe in this space and champion this space. And it's something that's been part of the college for a long time. Oh, they can't hear me enough? Is that better? Okay. So I think I approached this from a different space than some of my colleagues because there has been a deep culture of commitment to DE&I within the college. In fact, I've come to think of our college as the college of social infrastructure. We are education, we are social work, we are mental health, we are nutrition, we are sport. We think about the broad range of areas that have really come, I think, to the forefront of community throughout the past year in supporting society to be stronger, particularly in a pandemic. And so many of our faculty come to this space already with a deep commitment to issues of inclusion and access and equity. And the college has really worked hard, I think, to expand that work and embed those beliefs across our curriculum. In many of our departments now that you will see issues of social justice and equity and critical race theory embedded throughout what we teach our students. We do it in a structured way that brings them into this space and helps them understand how it informs the work they could be doing out in the field. But I touched on that hiring piece in the beginning because I think one of the important things that we do too is when we hire, we are very purposeful about how we describe ourselves as a place that believes in issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it affects the curriculum, how it affects our culture. And so when we identify those who come in to be part of our community, right from the very beginning, we are emphasizing this point, that they're coming into our culture and that they understand that that's who we are as an academic community. And I think we've been very successful in hiring a diverse array of faculty and staff, and I mean diversity in a wide range of experiences, not just from a racial perspective or ethnic perspective, but a range of other aspects as well. Beyond that, then, I think what we've done too is to try to be more purposeful and intentional in how we go about and recruit and diversify our student body. We've been deeply embedded in a number of communities from Cincinnati now through Dayton, working directly with high schools to try to encourage more students, particularly those from underserved populations, to come to Miami. We have just one example, we have a deep partnership with Aiken High School in Cincinnati where we start working with them in junior high. To think about careers, particularly in teaching, but perhaps also in social work and other areas, so that they begin at that early age thinking about a pathway into the professions that we think matter to society, and we hope will choose Miami to come here. And in fact, we think we've been very successful in this. We as Miami recruit more diverse students into teacher education, and more importantly, we complete them in teacher education, which is not always the case in any other university in Ohio. So we're very proud of the work that we're doing there to continue to champion the diversification of our education pipelines, but I think it's more than just bringing them to Oxford. We've learned the communities who we want to serve are not always going to come here. We need to be reaching out to other communities, and so we've been partnering with Andy and the regionals in delivering some of our programs in Hamilton, taking our educational programming out to other communities, but also working in a way that takes our programs into schools. And so we now deliver some of our programs in places like Cincinnati, up in Columbus. We just moved into Dayton, Mount Healthy, where we are trying to upskill and reskill folks who are paraprofessionals in schools, folks that tend to be from underserved communities, folks who we know are deeply committed to their schools. They probably live in that community, but did not have the opportunity to complete an education degree or to get that teaching certificate. And so rather than to say, come here to Miami, in Oxford, we say, how are we going to take Miami to you? And how do we provide the funding to help you upskill in a way that allows you to get a teaching certificate so that you can move from the back of the room to the front of the room, and you can be the role model and the teacher in those schools. So we've been trying to be very creative about thinking holistically how we think about this work. The other, and I could rattle off all sorts of things, right? We could keep going, but one other thing I think that we've done this semester is really to try to start taking a hard look at the data. What does the data tell us about achievement gaps? And how do we use data to guide our decision making and our resource investment? And so part of what we do now as a leadership team in the college is we look at our student data. We break it down by various groups, and we begin to look at issues of access, retention, and completion. And do we see disparity of impact? Do we see some groups achieving more than others? Do we see some groups retaining more than others? And if we're seeing those achievement gaps, why? Right? What is the barrier that's happening? My philosophy on this is not asking why students fail, but how are we failing students? So how do we begin to think about ways that we can change our culture, our policies, the ways in which we are interacting with students so that we can break down the barriers to help them be successful within the college and hopefully go out and achieve their degrees? I could keep going, but I'm going to stop right there. But I think for us, it's really sort of thinking outside of the box of how do we think differently about our work? How do we really push the barriers, the boundaries, so that we begin to sort of meet people where they are, to bring them to education and provide them the supports to be successful?
So the College of Creative Arts is made up of several different departments, ranging everything from ETBD, emerging technology and business development, architecture and interior design, music and theater, arts education, and then we also have the whole theater program and performances and the art museum kind of under our belt. So it's a lot of creatives. And our dean last year, after the murder of George Floyd, she developed a social justice task force. So we started looking not just at the issues of diversity and inclusion, but really the issues about social justice, which have been, in many ways, very embedded in our division for a long time. We've done work down at the Miami University Center for Community Engagement in over the Rhine neighborhood in Cincinnati for over 30 years. We've worked with the urban teaching cohorts in that program for a very long time. So our track record from the division, and not just from at the center, but in many other departments, has been long-standing. I won't say that it's pervasive, but it's certainly been long-standing. And our dean put together this social justice task force that met during the summer. We wanted to make sure that we were prepared for the beginning of the year and making sure that we were staying on top of and staying ahead of issues. And she put out to us the question for this task force, which was made up of faculty and students. How can we create strategic action steps for the future that will guarantee that our visual and performing arts programming introduces the broadest array of voices, expression, and experience? So that was our starting point, right? Looking at the kind of performances, the outward exhibitions that come out of our division. That group, as we met during the summer, deviated a little bit from that, or I would say added to that a long list of ideas and programs that we wanted to initiate. one of them ended up being a CCA artist-led anti-racism training that everyone on the committee has had, and the dean has ambitions to have everybody within the division, all the faculty, take this anti-racism training. We are developing a divisional and a department DEI strategic plan. And some of the departments have already started on that. The dean sponsors a monthly anti-racism brown bag that's open to all faculty and students. So it's not just about thinking about diversity and inclusion, but engaging everybody in the community of the division in the discussions that are difficult discussions. And I think she's done a great job of facilitating and helping everyone talk about the things that are very difficult to talk about. The museum and the theater department have initiated great programs dealing with Black Arts Initiatives and a feminist art exhibition. The Department of Architecture, our students developed and organized a chapter of NOMUS, which is the National Organization of Minority Architecture Students. And for those of you who don't know, like in many fields, the number of African American or architects of color is very small. It's less than 2% of the total number of architects registered in the United States. And in terms of African American women architects, that number is fewer than 500 in the country. So when we think about how we can impact our hiring practices in a pool that's so very small, it's very difficult. We also feel a huge obligation to our students of color then who come into our department, and how do we facilitate and help them through this process when we know that there are so few numbers within the United States. One of the things that we've tried to initiate, and that actually helped us during COVID year, was online was not always a terrible experience. And in some ways that it provided us an opportunity to engage with folks that we might not have been able to engage in. So all over the country, critics that would come in for online critiques, we were able to engage adjunct faculty of color through hybrid and online courses. And now that we're moving towards complete, our ultimate goal could be back to face-to-face, I want to make sure that we can continue that, because my accessibility to architects of color is not here in Oxford. That's an hour away from any urban area. And so I want to be able to continue that and still continue to offer courses in whatever methodology or delivery system we can in order to assure that we've got a better kind of mix and equity in the department.
Okay, sorry about that. In the grad space, I did want to tell everyone that we have roughly 2,300 graduate students at Miami, but about half of them are online, part-time students. And so each year we normally bring in 800, 900 new graduate students, half of which actually will be on campus. And they're divided among 90 different programs. And so one of the big things that new graduate students face is a feeling of isolationism, no connection. And so I will tell you that's been one of the big new initiatives that we've worked on in the grad school, is to try to address that. And so one of the ways we've done that is we do have 4 graduate student associations right now. We have our large all-inclusive grad student association, but we also have the Graduate Student of Color Association, the Pride Association, and a brand new international graduate student association that is actually growing like you would not believe. The students that belong to these associations have people they can talk to. They don't have to be in the same grad program, but may be facing similar issues as other students in that different association. A goal of ours is to try to get an online grad student association as well, because they face different issues than the students that are here on campus. One thing that I think is going to be really important for our division is that we need to make sure that we are including our online students to feel part of this community and feel welcomed. And so we're working with EMSS to start this at the application stage, where we have communications to them very early on. And what my dream will be is that we get 100% of them to come back and receive their degrees face to face. But it will require them traveling from all over the place to be able to come and do that. The goal that we really want to do is try to make sure Miami is a welcoming community for all of our students, and for grad students in particular. And so we do not have formal icebreakers and things like that for grad schools. For grad students, we don't have dorm activities because these students are living out in the community. Many of them come from family, they have families with them. Many of them are working full-time while they're trying to complete their grad studies. So our challenge is to try to find a way for them to feel part of our community while they're doing their education at Miami. A couple of the things that we are working on right now is that we have had book groups. And the goal of these book groups is to expose our grad students other people's experiences, what they're living through that aren't like them. And they have been very robust, sometimes quite emotional discussions when we discuss those books. And then the final thing that we've been working on is that we have done a faculty learning community where we are actually offering resources and best practices for advisors to mentor students that don't look like them, that maybe came from different places. And we're implementing those with training sessions and things like that. And so this is one of the real wonderful things at Miami with faculty learning communities, is that you just don't do them. You're supposed to take what's the product of that faculty learning community and actually put it to action to address an issue that's important to you. So we'll continue the things that we did for years in terms of scholarships, recruiting of students, but these new initiatives, I will tell you, we're really focusing on the student experience, making sure that every student that decides to come to Miami for grad education feels welcomed and part of this community.
Thank you, and it's wonderful to hear all these perspectives, because you are what makes Miami whole, so it's wonderful to hear about these efforts coming together. So we wanted to make sure we also have time for questions from those here. So I am happy to walk down with the microphone for those who would like to ask questions. I'm happy to also pose questions, but we want to make sure that we can have a conversation with everyone here. So if you have a question, if you could raise your hand, and I'm happy to come down and provide the microphone. Educators, of course, we also know we're also very comfortable with silences as people start thinking about this.
Christina, one thing I could add in the moment of
Yes,
silence, because apparently I'm not comfortable with silence. You know, I think we talk a lot about building an inclusive culture here, which is incredibly important for all of our students. I think it's also, though, pushing our students here to get other experiences so that they become better able to deal with a diverse world all around them. And we talk about, you know, teacher ed and social work, we talk about not just diversifying the professions. It shouldn't be just on those who are diverse to help and create inclusive environments. It's actually making sure all of our students, regardless of what their background is, are to be prepared to work in diverse communities and to spread that inclusion elsewhere. And so, you know, I think, as Mary talked about, the urban cohort in Cincinnati is a great experience for students from teacher ed to architecture. To actually move into a neighborhood where they actually live and work, which is often unlike the one they came from, to expand their cultural intelligence, which is what Jenny's school is working on right now, which I think is terrific. We offer teacher ed in Belgium now, or in Luxembourg, sorry. We're one of the few places where you can actually do your teacher education hours overseas and gain that experience from an international perspective. I think working with the Miami, there'll be a bus trip in January to go out to the tribe, right, and to move off campus and move into that, to go to Oklahoma to see the tribe firsthand, which I think is incredibly important. And so just to say, I think, you know, one thing is inclusion here on campus, or all of our campuses. The other, though, is also to push our students into places that might be a little bit uncomfortable so that they can learn to grow and work with other communities.
Thank you. And I know I have a question for everyone too, but I want to make sure that you.
I came to Miami, I marked my 29th year at Miami last Friday. And thanks. And I remember vividly what drew me to this institution was an application for, announcement for a minority resident librarian.
You might just have to come up here.
In that 29th year ago, there was an ad for a minority resident librarian. And I said, a minority resident librarian, an institution is saying, hey, how do we ensure that a new minted librarian has an opportunity to get some professional experience? Because so often people will say, you don't have the experience, so you can't get the job. And that 29 years later, I'm now the Dean of Libraries. So I've gone from the residency to the dean. And I think it points to the culture that Miami has attempted to foster. That minority residency program was built off a faculty position that Paul Pearson, who was the president at the time, said, I want to ensure that there are cohorts of people of color in our ranks. Because if you come together, more often you're going to stay together and you're going to succeed. The other part of that was a library whose principle is to provide information to people regardless of your station in life. How do you, as a staff member, have opportunities to get that degree? How do you, as that student whose parent has told you that you can't be something, have the opportunity to explore and to discover? So I hope that as we remember, I'm sorry, Christina, I hope that as we remember all the great things that we're doing at Miami, we are ensuring that we're not only talking about students, but we're also talking about our classified staff, our unclassified staff, and the opportunities thereof.
For our new deans, I've seen you all arrive with ideas you brought from your previous organizations. Would some or all of you talk about the thing that you have in your heart that you brought from that organization that you are delivering to Miami?
Thanks, David. So I can jump in first. You know, one of the things, and we've heard all of our deans here talk about, you know, how we support our different populations on campus. But one thing I also want to make sure we don't lose sight of when we think about this diversity, equity, inclusion work, we're also looking at the most vulnerable individuals in our community, the individuals who are not always represented. I'll be completely honest with you. I don't like to use the term person of color because person of color, I think, oftentimes is a cop-out for us to say we're including everybody. And then you look at certain populations when they're not person of color, and we're not serving them. Quite frankly, we're doing them a disservice. And so you'll hear me say underrepresented. You'll hear me say and name whatever is the demographic group that we're working with. And so, you know, as I think about that, I think one of those things we have to think about is, and Christina's done a great job of helping us think holistically as a university, how we move our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts along. But I think we've also got to think about what are those intentional strategies we're doing to support those populations that we know we are not serving at the same level. You know, one of the things that always is eye-opening for me when you start talking about our underrepresented faculty. And one of the things that we always hear about is, you know, I don't have a space where I can be my authentic self. And what does that mean? And so, you know, as a challenge to us is what are we doing to create those spaces? Because again, if we don't create those spaces, then we're not going to be able to keep those individuals. We're not going to be able to retain those individuals. You know, from a student space, we've actually done quite well when you look at retention and graduations of many of our students from different backgrounds. But if you look at those numbers, we got to do better, if we're being honest. It's not good to me to say we've had 85% of our African-American students are being retained and graduating, but then we look and they're 2.6% of our population. And so, you know, I'd ask us to how do we scale that up? And then I think the last thing I think we've got to think about, Dave, to your point is, we've also got to think about how diversity, equity, inclusion work doesn't end at the borders of our campus. Oftentimes you hear us talking about the things we're doing within our units, within our divisions, but diversity, equity, inclusion work is engaging our communities. You know, if you look at the broader Butler County community, we have a very, very diverse community. In Hamilton, I think our population is 21% African-American and 19% Hispanic or Latinx. Middletown, very diverse populations, Westchester. And so again, how are we engaging those communities? Because we've got to be the ones who model the behavior we want to see for our surrounding communities. And if we're not engaged with them, then they won't see the great work we're doing, and we won't be able to really move our diversity, equity, inclusion mission beyond our borders.
That's you, Jerome. Jerome is the electrifying force here. So just to, so previous to coming to Miami, I was at Rowan University, which is a state university in New Jersey, and I was the PI on a project called Revolutionizing Engineering Diversity, and we were looking at it from a comprehensive view, because as a profession, we have serious challenges in terms of underrepresentation at all ranks of students, faculty, staff. So when I came to Miami, some of the things that I feel that we could definitely do better in, of course, is increasing the underrepresented minority populations as well as a women population in engineering and computing. But it's also the culture, right? Because one thing that I learned the hard way at my previous institution is we can bring in underrepresented minorities, but if the college is not ready to receive or the culture hasn't changed, it can be a pretty hard space for them to succeed in. So you have to build that culture. And one huge difference that I see at Miami is there's also a lack of socioeconomic diversity in our students. So there are, in terms of first-generation college students, I was used to having 50% first-gen college students in my classroom at my previous institution. Here it is much, much lower. Same thing with our Pell-eligible students. So there is a difference also in terms of what Miami has been in the past and what we are aspiring to be in the future. So I would say we have to change some of the cultures, not only in our spaces, but also in our community, because we do reside in a community. And the other thing that I realized in talking to lots of my faculty and staff is we also didn't do much outreach to our surrounding communities, which are rural, and we didn't, say that this could be a place that they could come to and that they could succeed in. So I think there's some work for us to do, at least from my college's perspective.
Okay. Oh, should I go? Yeah. So 3 things. I love when Andy talked about being your authentic self, so I want to start with that. I'm a woman dean. There are 25% of the business schools in the country are led by women. I'm an immigrant. Apparently I have an accent, but I think you all have accents. And none of my qualifications are from America, so they're all from New Zealand. So I came into this job when you were talking about authentic self. In my last role, I could be my authentic self because I'd been there for 16 years. So I think personally, when you come to a new institution, you have to show up authentically, but it takes a little while and I believe I did, but I think for people to get who you are, because you're not of the majority, number one. Number two, so a reminder to be authentic to yourself. Number two, I worked for the Drucker School. It was named after Peter Drucker. He was the father of modern management. He believed that management is a liberal art. What that means, it's simply a context within which the liberal arts are practiced. Now, if you follow Drucker's work, he's very much a humanist, and he believes that you should treat all people with dignity and respect. And as a leader of an organization, it's your responsibility to make sure that people can flourish within their place of work, because they spend so many hours there, basically. So leading through people is something that I believed in anyway before I went to the Drucker School. It spoke to me, but that was something I spent 16 years focusing on, developing programs, responding to Drucker's work, and then developing, leading a business school that spoke to that. And then the last thing that I took with me, and Christian will know what's about to come, is that because our diversity in Southern California was different to the conversations we have here in the Midwest. It was very focused on Hispanic and Latinx populations. So that was one of the first conversations that Christian and I had actually, is what are we going to do? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your insightful comments and sharing what you are doing in each one of the colleges. As higher education, one of the pillars of higher education today is related to civic learning and democratic engagement. If we want to create the new, transformative environments that we need for our students and everyone. How civic learning and democratic engagement is embedded in the curricula that you have in each one of your colleges, and in practice, how has been the impact, how students are really engaged in these kind of opportunities that many times are more set up in a platform of co-curricular or service learning or opportunities like that. Instead, I won't say necessarily here at Miami, instead of being embedded into the whole curriculum that you offer to our students. I don't know if that is clear.
So that's a very interesting and also difficult question. I think from a curricular classroom point of view, it's our job to always, as academics, challenge the students to think, to provide facts to help them analyze data and facts, to examine alternative ideas, and help them analyze and come to conclusions. In the environment that we're currently in, that is very challenging, especially at a place like Miami, because in this current society that we live in, because students oftentimes are the products of their upbringing. And as we pointed out, many of Miami's students are upper middle class white who come from a very strong belief system where they have not had the opportunity to hear alternative ideas and hypotheses. With social media and everything we have right now, you're either on one side or the other, right? And we see that with the polarization. There's very few people in the middle. So when you try to challenge people's beliefs, and not in a way to change their ideas, but to get them to question them and to make their own decisions, they often view that as you're trying to brainwash them. And they then report back to their parents, who then call us up and say, well, you're trying to brainwash my child, and no, that's not the case. And so I think as educators, we just need to continue to present things and present it in a way that we want them to make their own decisions. They need to look at the big picture of things, develop a value system as to how they're going to evaluate things, and make sure that they're hearing all sides. Because if you're not hearing all sides and you're not open-minded, then you're not going to be able to make a decision. But you're right, it's a very difficult time. And I think one of the things with being outside of the classroom is that you get more of this intermixing, and especially if you're out in the community. And like it was pointed out, if you can get students to be into much more diverse situations, then via osmosis, right? And it's not coming from a professor's point of view, it's coming from the real life situation. But you hit on a very difficult topic that I think we all as educators are facing right now.
Yeah, I wanted to just sort of add that one thought that I had from our dean's social justice task force was that we've also been talking about the need for for faculty to really examine their curriculum and decolonize their curriculum. So it's not just about trying to figure out these other pathways in which people can feel comfortable and included. It has to be, like, we really have to look at what we're teaching and making sure that in the classroom we're representing a broad array of voices. In our own spaces, we can do that as well. In the Department of Architecture, we took on our George statue. Last summer, at the beginning of the school year, we put a shroud over George Washington as a way, as a pause point to say, let's have a conversation about this, right? The statue of George Washington in our department it's been there for a long time, right? And in many ways, our students look at that statue as a mascot, right? There are architectural lessons to be discussed about how he's placed in the space and the access point, and those are things that we can talk about with students. But there's also, a subtext, a narrative about who is he and why is he even in our space, and what does it mean if George Washington is emblematic of a particular political philosophy about democracy and equality. What does it mean that he's sitting on a pedestal, standing on a pedestal above everybody in the center of a space? So we tried as a department to engage that discussion with our students, and we've opened it up to any department in the university that wanted to engage with us. The history department stepped in, and we did programs with the history department. Various faculty in the art department have engaged, and so we're trying to keep this conversation going. We know that if that had been a statue of Robert E. Lee, it had been gone, right? But George Washington is a much more complicated figure, and to not address him, I think, is a mistake, right? Because we assume, because he's got this familiarity in our department, and students walk by and rub his foot for good luck, like he's become this mascot. But not every student responds that way. Not every student in our department comes through and sees George Washington the way that others see him. And so it's important to have that conversation. That's been a challenging one, and it's been one that has not been well received in the community. But we're continuing to do that, and I think that it's a responsibility that we have, and we should continue.
So in the College of Engineering and Computing, we have something called socially engaged engineering and computing that runs as a theme. But one thing that I noticed is it was only a few students that opted for it, right? And in terms of our curriculum, I think computer science is the only one that even has a course around ethics of design, right? And that's a huge part of engineering and computing. Because if you look at most of our designs that we have done in the past, it's been designed for a 6'2" male, right? And that has consequences, but we don't talk about that in our classroom. So one of the things that we're thinking of is, how do we embed this into our capstone design? That is one aspect that we evaluate. So it can be easily integrated, but it's because it has never been done, or they feel like they have not been trained to address some of these factors. Our professors don't feel like they're qualified to even discuss this. So how do we get them to that space where they feel that they're qualified to discuss this? And it actually has a huge impact on our profession as a whole. So I think there's room, but we have to get them there. And that is something that we're working on. And one thing that I would add is, with lots of our things around inclusion and how professors change their practice, unless we change our reward system, people won't do it, right? So I think it comes back to that as well.
Thank you so much. I also have the unfortunate task of being timekeeper. So I want to, a couple of things. First, I want to thank everyone on this panel, because you are amazing leaders and colleagues and DEI partners, and it's so clear from everything you're doing. So thank you all so much for being here. We don't have time for a specific question, but I have had a request for a comment. So I want to make sure that we provide that at least a minute for that. So
Thanks everybody for coming today, and I really appreciate your ideas about representation and visibility, but I just would encourage everybody to look around. And if I'm looking at it right now, I'm pretty much the only person here who looks like I'm from an East Asian country. I'm from China, as a matter of fact. And I have also noticed that, you know, statistically, among all the campuses in, you know, of Miami University, there's 2,083 international students, and among them, 1,643 are from China. But I'm also noticing a huge gap, a huge disconnection between the international Chinese student body here versus everybody else in Miami. I've been to a couple of those, you know, initiative, diversity and inclusive spaces, and pretty much every time I am the only person there who looks like this. So I would encourage everybody, while you're talking about representation, talking about visibility, to keep that in mind. And I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming.
And thank you so much for saying that, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you. Thank you.